Well, welcome everyone to our monthly webinar. Tonight we've got Tam Turkai that's going to be talking to us. She's going to be talking to us about uh, unlocking the power of LPM and TBM. She wrote a book about this. She's going to tell us all about the book. Pam joined us back in about November of last year, and she's been teaching classes for us and gets some amazing reviews when she does it. I don't think either one of y'all went through her classes, but probably we'll get some of her students in here in a little while, maybe. Tam also leads all of our webinars. So the last two or three that we've done, she's the one that's set them up and sent out the emails and done all the hard work behind it. And I really appreciate her doing that kind of stuff for us. Tam, like I said, Tam wrote the book about that she's going to talk about tonight and go through for this webinar, but she's also written some other books. Maybe she'll tell us about those. And with that, Tam, I'm going to leave it over to you to show us all the fun things with TBM and LPM.
Awesome. Well, as Matt said, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We had more people sign up, but you know what? It's okay. It's all, we'll record this. We'll catch people on the recording sites because we know it's really, really busy. But I do so appreciate you guys taking time out of your very busy schedules and joining us. As Matt said, my day job is to be a teacher. I absolutely adore it and just have so much fun. But for years and years and years, I have been saying that I wanted to write and would always say that, you know what, the people who come to my class, I touch them, but I know sometimes they need a way to share some of those messages back home with some of their leadership, with some of their other people in their organization. And I wanted to start being able to provide those contents to reach those broader audiences. And frankly, I just finally started to say, you know what, I need to just focus in on doing this. And so I've written a couple of more journal-like books that help Scrum Masters and RTEs with their daily duties of kind of doing the observing portion, because I knew when I was doing that role, I was really had a tough time doing the silent observation. I always needed a place to jot down notes. But then I also, at the same time, was learning to do my writing, working with an editor. And my first book that I was able to publish is on this topic of lean portfolio management and technology business management, and where I have always felt that the two disciplines complement each other so incredibly well. I've since been able to publish another book that's on a little bit more personal side, but I'm in the process of working on my third one, which is going to be on lean agile metrics. And it'll probably be out in third quarter because I'm right now working on the second revision copy with my editor. And we'll continue to move forward. So pretty excited about that. But you're here because of the lean portfolio management and TBM topics. So let's just jump into it. So first and foremost, this is about fusion, and it's about the fact that I have always felt that the products complement each other, the mindsets, the what brings into place with being a practitioner as well as a trainer, and helping with agile transformation with many companies across industries in the medical field, in the insurance field. I predominantly spent the most of my time in the automotive manufacturing world. And but since then, I've seen similar things. And ultimately, when large organizations tend to go down the path of either lean portfolio management, I've seen missing pieces. And then I've since been able to work with organizations on their technology business management piece and seeing them also miss pieces. And it's like there's such a complement. There's such a complement there. But we wanted to first and foremost start off with making sure that anybody here has that critical understanding of what are the basic principles and concepts of LPM and TBM, because maybe one of them is new to you. And then what I can't do in my book is doing some playing with the numbers and playing with these concepts. So at this point, you should all have an Excel file that I sent about half an hour, 45 minutes ago. So please check in your in basket. And I'm sorry, I have a 80-pound dog who's decided to freak out and is trying to literally climb up in my lap. So something's going
Wants,
So
wants to learn about LPM and TBM.
yeah,
Tam,
exactly.
I did post that Excel workbook in the chat so people can download it if it's not in their email for whatever reason.
Awesome. Or yeah, went to your junk mail. So definitely pull that out. And we're going to see the majority of this time is to really kind of, again, play with numbers and see how things work together and how they complement. So, all right, everybody got that?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. All right, hold on 1 second.
Get rid of the dog or puppy. So mistreated.
Yes, I'm sending him away. I apologize, but he is way too much of a distraction. Okay, so it is about fusion. So here I've got the apricot and the plum together. My book and how I did it was I really try to do a culinary metaphor to make these concepts really approachable. And so that's why I've kind of continued that practice here. And I'm not sure if you're a foodie like I am, but some of the greatest things is when you go to restaurants where they are doing fusion, and ultimately it's that concept of where you have a new way of thinking about ingredients, presentation, and taste. And chefs love to kind of have these and craft dishes that transcend traditional conventions, and it combines elements from different parts of culinary traditions and creates these unique and very flavorful dishes. And that's what I wanted to kind of help hone in on. And the fact is that we can do something similar with taking and approaching lean portfolio management along with technology business management. So it's not just harmony. It, to my mind, it is revolutionary. I mean, it together, this is what really can elevate an organization's ability to deliver value and to make more informed decision making. Um, and ultimately, what I have seen out in the world is that organizations absolutely treat LPM and TBM as distinct initiatives, like separate ingredients in the pantry. But there's they're not. They really are not. And so let's talk about some of those challenges that I've witnessed over and over again, and we'll pause and see if you've seen something similar in your world. So when it comes to lean portfolio management, I have seen this over and over again. I have had groups from the PMOs coming to me and saying, we know we're going to be looking at it and maturing into lean portfolio management, but I don't know what it is. I want to understand what our role as a PMO will be. And ultimately, they literally want to kind of understand how they graft what they were doing as a project management office to what is their new role in an LPM endeavor. And I have seen it time and time and time again where they do not want to include finance in these conversations. And I have to admit, I do the whoop.
What do you mean by that?
I
Because
mean, I
that's
literally said, no, we're not going to bring finance in yet. We're not, no. We want to understand this first before we bring in finance. And I have been floored by this. Richard, you're hearing something different? Because I would
no,
love to
I
know
want to
your
ask you. I want to ask you a question. I want to get
sure.
clarity on the technology business management. So within the PMO, we've got business project managers. We have IT people. So your definition is targeting which of the two?
In lean portfolio management, from the standpoint of how SAFe constructs it,
Yeah, yeah.
it
No,
is literally.
well, that the LPM, are you saying that the technology business manager is a part of the LPM? Because we're funding projects with the PMO. With the LPM, we're funding value stream. So a lot of folks, when you get that confusion, they're used to the project funding, which is what we do, right? Because you got your annual budgeting, and they haven't gone as far as like giving you a pot of money like time and materials money, say, hey, here's your value stream. go allocate it, right? So that's probably why they're saying maybe not bring finance in. Is that?
And but in order to even begin to contemplate making a transition from going from project-based funding to funding for a value stream, I absolutely categorically champion and believe we need to be bringing finance in to have them involved in the crafting of this so that they too understand what it means to go from a project-based funding model to how we would actually formulate a product-based funding model, a value stream model. And I'm not saying it has to all be done all at once, but they need to be part of those conversations and absolutely understand what is a value stream in the new construct. How does it actually be associated? Because we are going to attribute if we look at our canvas, we need to absolutely know what is part of the revenue stream, what are the costs, and we need to capture all of that. And far too often, I've literally had the, no, we're not going to bring them in. And I'm like, that's a mistake. That is a mistake. And so I, again, want to be able to show that how they can blend well together and be able to set up for success.
Got it.
So,
So,
yeah.
if I can, Tamara,
Mhm.
right? In our organization, right, we want to do LPM. I mean, our portfolio manager said we want to go LPM, but we don't want to bring the finance part of it.
And you are absolutely making my point, Ramya. I keep having this, and there's this fear of bringing finance, but even under project management, you needed to have finance there. And so I have to admit, I struggle when I hear this from organizations because I'm like, what's changed? Why don't you want finance involved? Because we need finance. We absolutely need finance.
So are they thinking, because the LPM is based on the allocated budget, the money, right? So when they're saying don't bring finance in, how are you going to function if you don't have the dollars allocated to?
I'm with you, Richard, and I've had to go through this over, and I mean, this is not just a one-time off case. This continuously is a trend that I see over and over and over again. And I see Matt's head kind of shaking. Ramya just spoke up out of the blue that this is something that we frequently see. And to my mind, I likened it to that, you know what, we are missing fiscal opportunities. We're missing that connection between what are the directions on the financial side along with the strategies, along with how we're going to make sure we put the checks and balances in place for actually, managing the portfolio. And so to my mind, the results of this miss are things like market setbacks, talent attrition, and to my mind, an inedible cake. I mean, this bottom line, if you use this food analogy, to my mind, this is trying to bake something where you're going to likely see the middle fall out or collapse because you're missing that financial aspect. But hold on, because I've also then been on where clients have asked me to work with them on doing technology business management. And they've mentioned, and the reason I've been brought on it is because of my experience with SAFE and with agile transformation. But what I've seen here is on the TBM implementation side is a real serious disconnect with their agile teams and with their ultimately running organizations. So it's an absolute mismatch of ultimately thinking in terms of, and as you're going to see here as I go through some of the concepts of what happens with TBM, TBM is a model that sort of has some of its original foundations in ITIL. And so there's some of this construct of where they're like, oh, well, you just substituted in project management or initiatives of where we're putting some capitalization. And that's the only piece we need to worry about in TBM. And it's like, no. It's a holistic thing that we need to be in place. And we need to make sure that, again, the connections are all being put into place so that we can actually plan, do, check, and adjust the numbers along with the backlog and help direct that. So,
Tamara,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I know LPM to a good
You're
extent,
good.
but
I'm going to give you enough about TBM. I hope to make
yes,
you
I have
dangerous.
no clue about TBM. I'm clueless about TBM actually. If you can share some basics about what it is.
Yep, let me do that for you guys. So let me just say too that one of the things you're going to find with technology business management is they sometimes, again, think of themselves or are formulated in this concept of IT as a business. And they sometimes get caught into this trap of let's show back costs, let's charge back costs for IT as a business within the organization. And I'm going to tell you right here and now, I believe that fundamentally that was completely and utterly short of where our market needs to be. We need to be able to bridge the IT business chasm and merge value-driven approach that embraces holistic, lean financial management, and blend the two of them together. So let me help you to understand by making sure that you have a good understanding of at least both of the frameworks and the mindset so that we can see how there's a lot of connection. So let's start with, regardless of LPM or TBM, let's think about what IT does for the enterprise or our external customer. So as we can see, we often have IT that's, procuring technologies, data facilities, utilities, and people to deliver services and capabilities.
Mhm.
Think of like our overall email systems and data sharing and having teams. There are just stuff that IT does that is in support of the operations of the business. And then we have our delivering and supporting and maintaining of infrastructure and our workplace productivity tools. So think in terms of we help supply HR software for the hiring and tracking of employees. We have so that we can pay people and all of those pieces. And then we start to build on top of the onion that we partner with business and technology owners to improve business processes through either automation or exploitation of our information. And sometimes organizations get caught into, well, those are our internal customers, right? That's our internal customers. I'll tell you my preference, and you're going to see this, that I think we'll all be much better served if we can assume and align on our customers are our external people who buy our products, services, and solutions. And so ultimately, the last part of the onion is that we provide technology and employ people and data and processes and services to drive business outcomes. And this is fundamental when we get to where we start to see and can bridge the gap with where we need to be bringing and thinking in terms of providing those business capabilities. Because I do not think there is a single business product service solution that does not have a technology component anymore.
All right.
And I'll pause there. If you can think of one, I'd love to hear it because I'm even paying my babysitter with Venmo anymore.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So as we can see, there's that onion of what does IT do for our enterprise and for our external customers. Some of our principles and fundamental concepts is lean portfolio management aims to align lean agile business practices and principles with the way organizations plan, fund, and execute their initiatives to achieve their future state. Can we agree on that? I mean, it's about being able to understand whether it's our value streams and whether you want to say they're value streams that AKA should be profit streams. And sometimes we have value streams that may not be associated with profit streams, but by far and away, the majority of them should be.
Yeah.
But they are about achieving our future state, right?
Yep. Agree.
Technology business management is an investment discipline that aligns organizations and their technology spends to business strategy and value. I don't know about you, but doesn't that sound like an awful lot of overlap to you?
Let me slow that one down. Technology investment discipline that aligns organizations and their technology spend to business strategy and value. That's kind of how it's done, Tim.
Yeah, you're going to see as we go through it that there is a huge amount of overlap. So on
There's
the
the-
LPM side, Well,
Mhm.
and I'll show you some pictures so you can kind of see it. So on the lean portfolio management side, we give agile organizations a framework through which to align our agile teams with the structures that govern them. So think of our governance pieces that we have with our horizons, our decision-making complex. And ultimately, we want to be able to get that faster time to market. We want to be able to get fast feedback loops. We want to make sure we're building in that quality. And we're helping to promote that not only are we doing a customer-centric approach to building products holistically that delight our customers, but obviously not so that it's a free service, but so that we engender the livelihood of our organization.
Yeah.
Well, in TBM, what we really need to also do is to give our organization that holistic view of all cost and be able to basically, again, make informed decision making about the technology so that it aligns again with our common business or objectives.
That's a
So
business.
ultimately, it is about having both of these tools to help leverage the cycles and go through. So ultimately, they help our organizations get aligned and stay aligned around creating value.
Are you associating TBM? Let's talk about the LPM, and it helps to fund. It's the stories are vertically slicing the functionality, so you get it quicker and faster, right? Time to value.
Mm-hmm.
TBM is normally associated with more of a horizontal slice.
It
The
can be,
product,
but
the
I
product
don't
really
think it.
the product becomes the architecture almost, because it may be a long time before the product's actually delivered, right? So is that how you're associating TBM with a phase-based approach? Or am
No.
I out of the
Yeah.
okay?
I'm not sure how much you've experienced about TBM, but let me go into that right now. But I'm going to kind of
Okay.
start walking the walk. So to keep us all at this incredibly strategic level, I want us all to be up with focusing on external customers,
Okay.
our enterprise level, and that ultimately our whole concept is we need to have these development value streams that align with solutions that ultimately we all have to have alignment with the operational value streams that deliver the customer-centric solution to those external customers. So value to customers, value to enterprise, right? We're up at that strategic level. If
Okay.
you start getting me down to talking about internal clients, I'm going to tell you, you're too down in the weeds. We need to be up at this level of what is the revenue generation portion, and we
Okay.
also need to see the associated cost.
Okay.
Okay. So once you have this, I believe you will fundamentally then drive for alignment for your internal customers too. But if you do it vice versa, I believe you'll get caught in that trap. So start here, work backwards is the way. But this is going to make life so much easier as we start to see them in place. So again, for those of you who are not as familiar or need a little bit of refresher on our portfolio defines and governs a set of development value streams where we get that budget in. And then ultimately, we should see that our backlog is helping us to actually manage the spend on that in terms of epics and enablers for those pieces. But I'm going to tell you, I don't believe it's enough. I don't believe it's enough. So and I'm going to try to make the case for that as when we get into the hands-on piece of this. So now let's get into some TBM. So look at this drawing here, because at its core, technology business management is a systemic and taxonomy.
Okay.
What it is done is it's a structured categorization of technology related cost and investments. It's basically a chart of accounts that a bunch of financial and CFOs and CEOs got together and said, you know what? Rather than all of us making it up differently, we need to have one single chart of accounts so it makes sense. And you're going to see that this is what actually gives us the ability to benchmark. So what this is a categorization process that acts as like a Rosetta Stone, if you will, where ultimately what we will see is that we have predefined chart of accounts from cost pools to what they call is technical service towers.
Okay.
So it describes how technology functions supported IT spends in terms of grouping relevant to the owners and consumers. So you can see things like data centers, compute, storage, networking. So again, it's a chart of accounts and it is an organization. It's a taxonomy system so that ultimately, as we build up from the bottom, we have the ability to have these defined in a view that finance understands because we see the cost centers. And then we have those middle sections that totally make sense to your office of your OCIO or your CIO from that standpoint of really and truly where is the money going from an actual technology piece. And then ultimately we should have, and what they will say is, and let me put this piece in, is they usually say, you know what, let's just start with a chargeback or showback model, which is how do these then translate to what actually goes to run individual business units? Or in this case, let's use the words of portfolios or operational value streams. We also can be able to have the ability to see this in terms of the solutions themselves and even to customers if we needed to. So it's a taxonomy system at its very basic point. So by having the ability to have them into these logical categories and subcategories, it provides for clarity and precise tracking and analysis. And what we're going to also see is it also gives us the ability to benchmark. So this is created by the Technology Business Manage Council org. It is a group of thought leaders that put this together, and then there has become tooling that supports with it. But at its basic structure, it is a chart of accounts. So here's an example of how you might actually see this from how it translates up. That as your organization might find that it has multiple service offerings. It has licenses for Teams, WebEx, and Zoom. And because we're using that standardized chart of accounts, we're being able to categorize them in such a way that we're going to be able to detect those duplications or where that money is being spent. And as we see, that rolls up to a video conferencing bucket that can also then roll up to communications and collaborations, and then further up for workspace services. So we can see the service offering is at that cost pool type to the service category to the service type. So they create that structure that is in place. Why it's so important. And these I had to kind of fuzz out because I have to admit I stole it from somebody. Here's an example of ultimately, because we can capture this, we can see the percentage of IT spending on outsourcing, hiring coaches, consultants, advisors. And for this particular client, compared to the benchmarks of the median, the 25th percentile, the 75th, and because you can cherry pick and say, you don't know who they are, but you can pick 5 peers or organizations that you think are like your organization to basically be able to compare to. And in this particular case, we can see that this organization is spending a good, almost duplicate amount of their similar peers and extensively quite a bit more than the median.
Resource
Now, that
challenges.
doesn't necessarily mean that that's bad. It just is informed, right? It helps with the information of, well, why is that? Why is that? And we'd want to know that story. Here's another example of network infrastructure. Much, much lower than the median, much more closer to the 20th percentile, but not so far off from what their peers are doing. Again, another way to be able to see data in such a way to be able to say, wait a minute, am I really starving some of my technology where other organizations may be investing quite a bit? And am I overspending in other areas compared to some of my peers and to some of the medians?
Tam, could you say with that bottom one, the network infrastructure percent, could that maybe mean they're not allocating resources to the infrastructure, they're in the cloud?
We have ways of being able to connect that so that you can see those pieces. And ultimately, in this particular case, we could actually set those side by side and see if they're
Okay.
making that rollover investment. And again, we can always have the story, but the data is so incredibly important from the standpoint to help you to understand. You don't get this if you don't have TBM. You cannot go benchmark.
Hmm.
And this is an important piece. And I mean, I guess you could, but you have a lot of digging to go do.
Sam, where does the benchmark data come from?
Yeah, I was about to
Ultimately,
ask.
there are very few tools that provide this. And so anybody who's associated with taking on the technology business management, they're almost all of them adopting the Aptio product that was purchased by IBM, which is called Aptio One.
Okay.
But our
And
company is exposing this data. It's all their private information, right?
but they scrub it and they actually collect the information, and that's why you don't know who those peers are. And I purposely like whited out even kind of the industry so you wouldn't see it. But that's all it is you don't see their data. You're just seeing what was the aggregate so that you can see medians. And then behind the scenes, you can see similar attributes. You won't ever see their actual name, but you can see industries and you can see attributes about company size, FTEs, amount of revenue that you can then go cherry pick and say, this appears like they're similar to me.
Understood.
Yeah, incredibly impactful. Again, this is a data element that the reason they originally started was, Salesforce. There's a lot of companies that, well, for the work that I do, I have a tool. CIOs made the point of, I don't have a tool. We're all making this up. And we don't have like one way to do this that has ultimately some standards, some industry practices that we can learn from each other. And that's where the council came up with it from that standpoint. And then a tool was then developed around that taxonomy to actually make it easy to be able to collect the information. So the middle one is where you see ultimately kind of at that high level service of end user computing, networking operations, data service, business application. So much higher level. If we went back to that other drawing, it's more about that service type. And we can see again the mixture of how the bands are ultimately doing from the standpoint that, here a lot more money is being spent towards end user computing, a lot more towards network operations, but a significant smaller amount towards business applications. Again, there is no right or wrong answer with any of this, but it is about being able to have data to absolutely understand.
It's like we tell our
So,
teams, right? All the data is just a data point. There's a reason that it says that. Dig into that and figure it out.
right,
But the data itself is neither good nor bad.
right. Now, one of the things you're going to find is if I go back to this model, is that ultimately when you get to the cost pool, I don't know, let me just make up a number. If you have $1 million of cost accumulated in your cost pools, you have $1 million at your technical service level, and you have $1 million at the business services and $1 million at this showback chargeback. I call it basically being able to actually support your end customers, because ultimately it's about attributing them. It's about saying, you know what, we had $1 million in costs, but we want to slice it and dice it some that we understand it from the standpoint of finance knows how to see it, but we're also seeing it in the language that we understand it in IT, but we're also making it extremely visible to the business so they can absolutely understand not only what are their revenue ins, they're seeing the cost from the standpoint not just of their portfolios for investments, but bottom line, their operational costs. And they're ultimately pieces of all of that functionality that we were talking about that IT comes of, well, what portion of the towers, what portion of the work tech solutions? because they will likely need to pay part of that, or it needs to be addressed from the standpoint of you can't do business capabilities without actually taking advantage of the towers and the tech workplace solutions as well. So it's about making those costs visible with a set of rules of how are we attributing them? Where are they going, so that when we make decisions about some of our operational value streams, we're seeing the holistic cost. So let's get back to how I see these all coming together, and we'll kind of jump into the Excel file so that you can kind of see how it goes. So to me, all of this comes from this plan, do, check, adjust. So for the planning, we've got, and we need to heavily lean on lean portfolio management about understanding what are our strategic themes. What is our portfolio vision? What is ultimately our horizons, our capacity, and our lean budgets, and being able to have those decision making. I think lean portfolio management does a stellar job of helping to define and giving practical recommendations on how to approach this that TBM does not. They just say you should be aligning on strategy. Well, how do you do it? I don't know, align on strategy. Where's your numbers? There's an example of where ultimately the frameworks say the things, but LPM is giving you the framework to actually do it. When we get to the do, we can see that ultimately we have WSJF that is actually in play, trying to prioritize our sequence. We've got participatory budgeting that is going on that ultimately we want to be able to define. But I would actually champion you and say that the lean portfolio management framework is a little fluffy on how do you actually translate those epics to, are we actually aligning with our actual spend? And then how are we doing our checks and our adjustments? And bottom line, I'm going to tell you that I feel that this is where we really come into play by capturing those costs, that our TBM piece is able to actually display it so that we can check, we can adjust, and start the whole process over. So let's go ahead and open up our Excel sheets and see this in practice, because I think it will all come together. So we're going to start with this plan section. And as we see, we're going to actually look at what's our portfolio vision. We'll get into those budgets. We'll talk about some of the investment horizons, our capacity, and then starting to go into how our portfolio backlog. So if I bring up our Excel sheet here, portfolio vision. For those of you who've been in our LPM classes, this should look a little familiar. And here we've got an example of, you know what, we got Davy's Neighborhood Snacks stand. Keeping this really, really simple. And our value streams are, we got one for lemonade and one for cookies. We've got a budget of 15.5 million. We've got some desired KPIs where we want to get 4.5 stars, and we want to be able to get 20 million. I mean, that's more than a 10% increase in profit. So ultimately, that's our target for our revenue. Our key partners are our local grocery stores. Our key resources is grandma's recipe. So our cost structure is, we're going to follow the TBM model. And our revenue streams are those lemonades and our cookies. So how else can we get this budget if we haven't gotten that from finance? We've got to have that there. But let's talk about what was probably going on behind the scenes that we sort of don't talk about in LPM, do we? But bottom line, we should have seen year after year what were our overall spends. And ultimately, I give it a 3% cost of living inflation increase. But we also need to understand that if we are doing the portfolio at this level, how much of it is it made percentage-wise between the two different development value streams? So in this particular case, we've got this mixture.
Pam, just to clarify really quick, this is spend money that the company is invested in improving our lemonade product or improving our cookies product?
And is improving and keeping the lights on. They've already been investing in
Yep.
these profit streams, and so it's a holistic budget
Yep.
of both investment and operations. We will get into some how we're going to view that in a second, but this is just their total. Hey, you know what? What has it been cost year over year?
Yeah.
And have we taken into account some inflation and just normal cost of living increases that we typically see? But we want to also sanity check this with burden. So let's look at our burden rate. And just as a reminder, bottom line is more often than not, organizations take their entire cost to operate, regardless of what's being delivered and by who. This includes everybody, HR, your executives, you name it, you buy it, you're paying for it as an organization. Then you take your full-time equivalents and you just divide it. Burden, right? Pretty simple. Many people in the IT world don't know this, but it's really vitally important to finance and to your overall business people too, from a standpoint, because they need to be able to see both. So ultimately, we need to think in terms of, well, how many people are dedicated to your lemonade solution versus your cookie solution versus our overall portfolio? And I'm applying that burden rate that is a pretty common one that we see over and over again. But again, it's all going to be very, very specific to your enterprise, to your organization. And then we can see what is our annual burden rate for each one of those. And I just kept it a simple art. So
Tamara,
small.
if I can
Mhm.
interrupt you, right? What is burden rate? Because it's a new terminology for me.
Okay. It's all of your costs that your company incurs.
Okay. Expenses.
All of the expenses. Yeah. So
Okay.
all of your wages, all of what they
Say the
invest in for your health
office
insurance and
space,
for your
office
office
lights,
space.
everything.
You got it. Your executives, your HR, your ERP systems, everything.
Hardware, software, people, everything.
Everything. And then you just divide it by your number of full-time equivalents.
Okay.
So for some people, they may look at that 125 and go, I don't get paid that. No, you might not. And there might be some other people, that's nowhere near what I get made. Because it all balances out. it's just total expenses, total cost to run, divided by the number of full-time equivalents. So we'll get to it in a second of, well, what happens if we start to have predictable throughput. But ultimately, financial organizations, even before they get into what are our investments, what are the things we want to spend it on, they are already doing projections of ultimately what's their mixture of CapEx and OpEx. What's that ratio? Generally, it's been changing and leaning more and more towards being heavily weighted towards op. But overall, technology spends have been increasing for the past 10 years because, again, all of our products, services, and solutions have technology pieces to them. So overall, information technology costs continue to take a higher percentage of your overall expenses, but we are seeing that the mixture of cap and op is starting to switch, but generally, and again, this varies widely from organization to organization, varies widely from industry to industry. It also varies widely from some organizations are saying, you know what, technology is changing so fast, I don't want to worry about having to keep track of amortization and there, cap used to make a lot of sense because you could amortize over 5 years, 8 years. Technology is not lasting that long. So things are changing, and there's a lot of things that are being bought as software as a service, solution as a service. And so there's not those big outlays of purchases. So it is shifting, but let's just say that in this fictitious world, they're doing a 75-25 split. We cannot ignore OpEx and CapEx. We have to pay attention to this. So as we get into, okay, what is our burden rate for each of our quarterly PIs? Well, I can do the calculation because I'm just dividing those by 4, right? But now I understand again what we would expect to run, regardless of what they produce, how much it's going to cost us to run the lemonade art versus our cookie art, and about how much of a mixture finance is put aside from the planning standpoint for cap and op. And we could even calculate it down to each 2-week increment. Now, what's incredibly useful here is if we have predictable throughput by our teams, we can roughly get some ideas of average costs per story. Wait. And I am a firm believer of even sharing this information with the teams. They are smart people too. And when they start to see numbers like this, they recognize, oh my gosh, I have just as much responsibility to help highlight when things are stopping us from delivering, because it's expensive. It's expensive. So sharing this information can be incredibly powerful, but ultimately it is used to help set up those original plans. Now, when we have these numbers, we should be able to then go and see them from the standpoint of how is that mixture looking from the investment horizons. And I kept it here very simple, that I basically said, you know what, when it comes to retiring, I absolutely know that for my world and the way I'm choosing to do it, but every organization could be different, but they need to be explicit about this, that we're going to categorize that as operational. There is no actual, we're not going to take the interpretation of that in advances and there's something that's capitalizable there, nor are we going to do it with evaluating or merging. But even though there is work in Horizon 1 that's associated with investing and extracting, we all know that there's still a lot of enablers and there's still a lot of work. And again, we've got to hold true to our plans for our OpEx and CapEx. So I've helped highlight here from the standpoint, here's our 15.6 million. Here's our cap and op, and actually I've been able to actually address it out from the standpoint of how that even actually sort of adds out from our percentages of what we want to be able to assure our near-term needs, as long as our far-term proactive work that we want to be able to do. And as we can see how that works out from the standpoint of the individual horizons, and then Horizon 1, where that splits out for our cap and our op. And we can take that even further down to each individual art. We need to know this when it comes time to do participatory budgeting.
So Tamara,
Mhm.
so in our case, right, when we were talking about LPM, getting into LPM, they said, hey, we don't want to do participatory budgeting. Our budgets are standard for each art. And how they calculate the budget for the art is the salary of the people, right? So that is what is, they set standard funding for each art, which is nothing but the number of people into their salaries. And might be I just correlated with the burden, right? The burden is the,
I tend to, the salaries are definitely part of burden, but I would not say that you can calculate your art with just strictly salaries, because it would be way undervalued.
yeah, I also felt that. And in that way, we won't improve, right? Say, for example, if we want to allocate from one value stream to other, when the other value stream is performing well with our customers or market, right? There is no such flexibility because there are standard people in arts. There is no situation to make such calls when you're not evaluating how things is going in the market for your customers and deciding where to invest more or less. Right?
Yeah, and you're gonna see when we go full circle, we are going to make that evaluation based on this. So
Okay.
I have to admit, Ramya, I would love to get in and talk to your organization of why they don't want to do participatory budgeting because there's some
But
of the
can they,
power.
can they, excuse me, can they take just straight salary? Because normally if you do go to finance, I mean, they're gonna discount out the lease, the space. There's more that goes in that than just salary though, when they're
I
allocating costs to an individual.
I think, Richard, we're all agreeing with you there. Even
Yeah.
Ramya is questioning why her maybe it's just a miswording and they are misusing the word for salaries
Yeah,
instead of burden.
that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
To be fair, and I think Matt, as an owner operator, will totally agree with this. By far and away, your largest expenditure is people's salaries often. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
It-
so yeah, but it's not just salaries. That I can absolutely categorically, and if they are doing that way, I would be shocked.
Or
So
might be they put it that way, might be they consider everything, but when
yes,
we do not have a detailed conversation on it, but high level when
yeah,
they said this is how we fund this.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
and
when I used to work at a big, large corporation, the way we did it, everybody had an hourly rate based on their job title. So if you were a developer one or a senior developer or a lead developer, those had different hourly rates, but those hourly rates were aggregated such that it was salary plus benefits plus space lease plus computer use plus whatever. It was your, I think they called it like your fully loaded rate was the term that
mhm,
they used.
Yeah.
mhm,
And we had that for every single person in the organization. And based on their time input into the system, that every week you punch in your hours and say, I did 8 hours on this and 12 hours on this and whatever, we came up with our labor rates across.
mhm,
We didn't call them arts back then, but close enough
yeah.
for today's discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah, some organizations will make that, they'll call them sometimes blended rates, and then have them stacked. But organizations that are recognizing that in aggregate, y- you're expecting a level of specificity there that in a grand scheme of things, it all will come out in the wash anyways at the aggregate level. So why maybe go out of your way to make it so people start to get a little frustrated by, oh, why is this group versus that this amount and so on and so forth. So in the end, the math all works out. I'm sure you can see that it's just at a much higher rate with what I'm doing here. Just make it all easy peasy. So ultimately, again, I'm bringing in here some of the pieces that if you've gone through either Matt or my traditional LPM safe class, we kind of sidestep the whole OPEX, CAPEX portion of this. And I'm here to tell you
Just
in the
one
real life,
slide. One slide.
yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. The other thing we need to do a better job about understanding too is having the viewpoint that goes along with this for what we often refer to. I like to be a little bit more specific about calling it work type capacity for planning purposes, which is we know we want to reserve a certain amount of the working time of our art to our team in each and every time box towards what are those things that are the build the business work versus our enablers versus, and then SAFE calls them all different portions of that pie. Sometimes they call it maintenance, sometimes they call it refactoring, but in the end, to my mind, it's always a continuous improvement, decentralized decision-making slice of the pie that you're leaving it up to the individual team and arts for what comes in at their level so that they can absolutely make the decisions on how they're going to spend that. Because how else are they going to do things out of their retros? How else are they going to do things out of their inspect and adapt? How else are they going to be able to work on some of these things that they need to have? So they have to have reserve capacity. But again, we want to be able to see this from the standpoint of how does that kind of break out as far as OPEX and CAPEX. And again, I make the proposition that enablers and continuous improvement, decentralized decision making is going to definitely consume OpEx. Your CapEx is likely going to come from the build the business. It just makes sense, right? But it's still a mixture. It's still a mixture. And so we see those
Talk about
pieces.
that a little bit more. Take it in that a little bit more, a little further into CapEx and OpEx then, when you're allocating, you're affinitizing what rolls up under each. So, because the beauty of it is I think, what is the percentage? 75% OpEx?
Yeah, I kept OpEx at 75 and 25. And again, that was me just making up a number based on just patterns I see often. Every organization needs to come up with what they want.
Which is a good thing because you can expense that, right? Where CapEx, I'm trying to think when they're doing at the end of the year, you can't expense that CapEx, right? But you can't, that's just an expenditure, right? That will lower taxable
yeah.
income, right?
Yeah. Your OpEx is basically what goes out, is considered either, well, it's whether you're looking at it incurred or accrued. But bottom line, it is coming out of your taxable year. It is literally there. Whereas your CapEx, you're deferring it and going to take that expenditure and defer it over the lifetime.
Gotcha. Okay.
And ultimately, lifetime used to be, think about this, when you would buy tangible real estate, buildings, vehicles, licenses, you would own those for years, sometimes 5, 8, 10 years. I've been around long enough that those would sometimes be your amortization periods.
Yeah.
But nowadays, people aren't necessarily buying perpetual licenses anymore. They're definitely not buying a lot of hardware and infrastructure anymore. And so that mixture is going. But as we build stuff, and there's laws that say we can, as we build internal solutions, technology solutions, we can capitalize the burden rates, and we can for the people that build those solutions. But again, technology is changing so fast, but it does help your organization decide and adjust what's hitting the bottom line each year, because they can defer some of that capital expenditure. So this is pretty important from a financial and business standpoint, because those are things that are deciding up front and planning out for several years in advance. So we need to keep to it. We can't suddenly come back to them and we did it all as capital. And it would cause a lot of challenge from that standpoint. But more and more of them are moving from that standpoint. So 5 is now, well, again, we might want to start to think in terms of, if we have epics, we might maybe want to think in terms of, well, are they small, medium, and large? And as you can see, I'm coming at it a slightly different way. I'm coming at it from a financial perspective. If it's taking my 2 arts of cookies and lemonades to do this, and I have from this number here of what were typically our quarterly run rates for that, I can literally just use those numbers to say, well, if it's taking them 2 PIs, I definitely know about how much we would spend if we were doing that. So it's, again, just like with a lot of agile math, it's roughly wrong, precisely wrong, but roughly right. It's our numbers, right? But it gives us a standpoint of where we can kind of go from that standpoint as an alternative. So when we get to the,
so 4 million for a quarter to do everything, right? For Dave's, the store, that's lemonade and the cookie.
Right. Yeah. If we go back to ultimately, if we had all of them, the lemonade and the cookies, for each, and for the annual year, it's 15.6 million to just run them, We can see the mixture, but as we literally go through, it's almost 4 million per PI. Per PI. So when we've got that number, we can now understand that, you know what, if it's taken us 2 PIs to just deliver a small Epic, 2 PIs, just 2. That's pretty darn close to $8 million. 3 PIs, almost 12.
Hmm.
4, well, 15 and a half, which was exactly our number that we said was our annual rate, right?
Yeah.
So I think this makes us think of it differently. We're now talking with numbers that usually have a little bit more meaning to everybody involved. And so when we have those, we can go into WSGIF, right? We can start putting in our costs. We can start normalizing on that. We can start having our values that we go through. So everything that's here is just a simple, dirty, you know what, whatever epic it is, we'd go through our ones and then relatively estimate based on that. And we can literally see it. But I think in terms of instead of trying to just do it on rolled up points, I know this safe might not like me for saying this, but I want to come at it from a let's all be aligned on what the cost if it's going to take us this number of PIs. All right. So from that standpoint, and I'm going to now go on over to oops, I must have boo-booed there, but I'll go back. So we've kind of gone through this slide of really and truly understanding all the way through our portfolio backlog that we've got to have that way. We've seen all of these front end pieces that really come into play. And I've even jumped ahead a little bit to participate to our wish jiffy, because now we can kind of think of them in terms of our cost to just run our teams. And the same can be done when it comes in terms of participatory budgeting. Because ultimately, what I see that we have to do there when we're doing this activity is ultimately, we got to be able to see that from that standpoint, we've got to understand, again, we've got to revisit what is our run rates for the PI. We've got to then see what is it going to be for our rolling 3, because that's what we do in participatory budgeting, right? We're looking at the current and then the next rolling 2, or wait, yeah, our rolling 3, sorry. And then we need to understand, well, where does that take us as far as our planned OPEX and CAPEX? And then the rest of what we usually do in lean portfolio management absolutely pertains. But I believe we absolutely need to have this in play from the standpoint of understanding that mix and going back. And again, looking at all of those other pies that I put in place from the investment to horizons, because we're going to have pieces there that need to be constantly assessed as we go into participatory budgeting. We also have to look at our assessments of, well, are we still maintaining true to what our plan was, or do we need to adjust? I mean, there's always room for adjustment here, but again, these are usually things that have pretty amazing consequences at the business level and at the financial level. So we can't do it without having them involved. So we want to be able to sanity check against these ones as well. All right, now are you guys really ready for the fun part? Because
No.
I think, no, he's like, no, I'm still trying to assemble all of this.
Yeah.
So, that's okay. And again, this is one of those things that we will be happy to come back and work with you and talk more from this standpoint. But I want to make sure I get into the technology business management piece. So after we've done and gone through, again, the only thing that I'm suggesting when it comes to WSGIF and when it comes to our participatory budgeting activities that we do, like we standardly teach in LPM class, is don't forget to add in that viewpoint and that checks and balances with your CapEx, OpEx piece as well. You've got to be able to have that mix, because otherwise, think about this. If you're like me and you love to do home improvement, but painting your house is going to be 20,000, but you only budgeted for 5,000. What are you going to do? Just suddenly decide you're not going to start paying your gas, your electric, and your car insurance? I mean, I guess you could, but you're making decisions that are pretty far reaching and significant. And just like I would not do that without talking to my husband, I'm saying in an organization, you can't do this at the operations level of your agile teams without involving finance and the business in these conversations. And again, if we go back to what I was saying were some of the common problems of seeing these initiatives being done separately, that very well was occurring quite a bit. Go ahead, Ramya.
Yeah, I had a question on participatory budget. If you can go to your Excel again, right?
Yeah.
If you can help help explain how that would be done in this situation, right? So there will be stakeholders and they will be bidding their money to either of the arts. Can you explain how this was arrived at after as part of participatory budgeting?
Maybe it'll help if I show you with a slightly different view, but what I would say is I would do participatory budgeting for validating the operational piece, making sure that are we still in agreement on what we consider to be the operations? But remember, we're going to have enablers there. So there should be epics and stuff that are there. So honestly, I would treat them as two portions of let's do participatory budgeting for this amount of spend, and then let's do it for the next amount of spend for the CapEx piece is exactly how I do it. So one of the things when I teach the LPM class, and I'll bring up my, because it doesn't have it. We don't do this in safe. So, and I've never felt as comfortable about totally rocking the boat and saying, oh, I'm just going to go rogue on them. But I do have this really, hold on one second for me. Open. And browse.
Just say if they do it at the epic level, right? If I'm not wrong.
They do, but they don't really ever tell you if that epic is being designated at a certain, is this a build the business? Is there a certain percentage on it? I think, and I'm going to show you here in just a second, where how you can kind of make that from the standpoint of doing some rough numbers to help you along with that. All right, where's my lean portfolio management? Okay, here's a workbook that I did for a web or for a conference. So our business context was we were working for Hasbro. We're Hasbro. We're making our own Monopoly board. And so we, so we just did, and again, this is following the safe model, just strictly safe. And as you can see, we just look at the total portfolio budget, our cost of our epics and our solution operations, but they don't make that distinguishment between OpEx and CapEx. And again, I think we can get in trouble by doing this if we don't spend a little bit of time being able to sort of separate out those $2 amounts and literally make conscious decisions. Are we still okay with our operational, our op cost? Are we still good with this? Or are we doing some another enablers because maybe we need to put some above the other, and then looking at what are our capitalizable pieces. But ultimately, I mean, when we come down to our tables, we just had things like, oh, Epic One, we have our solution operations, bare minimum. But then we just have these epics. They're just pulling it off the overall top budget. You can do that, but I'm deathly afraid when that happens that we end up in this situation where everybody's appetite is, woo, give me the prime rib, give me the prime rib. I want to go for all of these epics, when we really just don't have enough dollars for that much capital. So that would be me going to Home Depot and buying everything I want for my home improvement when really I don't have the budget for it. So
how did you guys get out of it, Tam? How'd you get out of this one? You're 26, you only got 20 million to spend. and it totaled up to 26 million. What'd you do?
Well,
You
what they,
it down?
yeah,
You got it,
well,
you got it to 20?
well, that was the thing. I told them that they had 20 million, but the amount of projected cost of the Epics
Yeah.
solutions was 26 million. So they were in a deficit. Ultimately, they were going to have to make a choice to only spend 20 million. How
Yeah.
are they going to spend 20 million? And in
Yeah.
this particular case, I think the last people I ran this with is they ultimately decided they were all going to, contribute towards the operations.
Hmm.
They were, where they ended up, I think, being, where did they shortchange on this guy? Oh, here we can see they decided that the ranch estates were not the thing that they were willing to. But, every time I run this, it's always different. It's always kind of fun from that standpoint. So I always was tricky. I'm like, you mean you just didn't want to reduce the number of tokens? But, that's always something that they can do. But this is very approachable. But again, I find this can be a little scary because we might run into a misalignment.
The thing is in the real world, it's rare that you have $26 million in demand and $20 million in capacity. You usually have $80 million in demand and $5 million in capacity.
Yeah.
It's so crazy to watch organizations and look at stuff and they're like, but this has to be done. And when you just show them the math, they eventually figure out that it can't be done.
Yeah.
But their view of reality is somewhat skewed because they're living in one of their silos. But
Yep.
that's
Living in their silos, and as much as I love everything about Agile, I do. And you, those of you who've been in my class know that I am a firm believer. The one thing I don't believe in is not making and having the informed decisions about the dollars. I'm like, I'm all about relative. I'm all about close enough. But I want dollars because we do this at home and we should be doing this in business. Just again, as if we have little CEOs on our shoulders and we should have the numbers. So how do we do this once we've now done all that planning and exercise? Well, here's I don't know, is it an epic? Is it a feature? I'm keeping it kind of willy-nilly here from that standpoint, but I got something, right? And I've worded it as a story, but the thing that I want you guys to kind of see is that any of your backlog management systems, I don't care which one you have, you can configure it so that you can have attributes at the story level that says, well, what investment horizon is this associated with and what capacity type? Because as we capture that data in the backlog, we're going to be able to close the loop. And so from
You're
this,
adding that to the story. I've never seen that. The investment.
oh yeah, baby.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I like
let's build it right in our backlog, and our product owner should know this.
That's cool.
And absolutely should be capturing it really, really simply so it ties it back. And I mean, this is an obvious sketch, and I purposely did this one because if you kind of look at my story, you might start to see and recognize, that's kind of big. So originally we had that, this is investment one, extracting its build the business, but we can break this. We can split this because it is a pretty big story, and it's easily because we did it in the Gherkin method of given, win, then, and use an example. We realize, there's kind of two hidden enablers there. We need to be able to have a lookup of the tax rate. We need to be able to look up current gas prices, wherever that may be stored for this. As Peter, I want to precisely enter the amount of cash I want to spend at the gas pump so that it shuts off at exactly the right amount. And it takes into account the current gas price per gallon and the local taxes so that I don't accidentally spend more than I have with me. So by using, BDD and my example, we immediately were able to work with our team and go, oh yeah, this is big. This should split. And as we split it, we still have a story that's associated with what likely could be capitalized, but those enablers shouldn't be. And so ultimately we have some more, and it all can be captured in your backlog. And by doing this, guys, I'm just going to let you in on another little secret here. You also can get out of having to keep track of time. So, but that's a whole nother conversation that we can maybe do another webinar at another point. But this mechanic can help you do so much. But bottom line, and I don't have access to these reports, but it's ultimately having this ability that lets you close the full loop so that you go back to being able to pull some pretty amazing reports. And I had to kind of blur this out, and I can't show you a lot because they are company sensitive data, but you get some pretty intense reporting capability that starts to pull it all together. And I love LPM, but they shy away from how do we track it? How do we keep it? How do we do this? And I see that there's that fusion that we can bring in together. And whoop, I made this all fit. And ultimately, again, we didn't have our plan versus what our actual, because we're pulling it right directly out of our backlog, and we can adjust for the next planning period. We close the whole loop. We close it all back. So any questions for me? And I'm happy to stay on, and happy to answer any other questions. And gosh, we're happy to work with you on doing any of these activities, because what I've rushed through here in this hour and a half, just, I hope, starts to get your mind going from the standpoint of, if you intend to take on either lean portfolio management or technology management, I hope you remember what I said today and maybe stop and really pause and think about, maybe we should be looking at this holistically and making sure that we're maybe considering the synergies that we can have in place by actually doing both together, because they are for the end result, right? Delivering value. And I really do believe that together they can revolutionize what your organization can do, because it's bringing all the data together.
You have 2 books you've written? 2?
I have 2 that I have written, and I'm working on my 3rd to due out in the 3rd quarter.
So of the 2, if we're going to buy them, which of the 2 should we start with?
So the one that this is pulled directly from is from my book that's called Balancing Flavor and Strategy. So this book right here, so How You Create Value with LPM and TBM.
Okay. And that's one you recommend first, right? If you're gonna
Yes. Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
My other book that's out right now, Silver Sisters, is of a more personal nature. My bestseller right now, which is kind of amazing because it was just something done off the cuff just to capture something I needed to get off my chest. And
Congratulations.
but the next my next book in the Lean Agile space is the Lean Agile Metrics, and again that should be out by 3rd quarter.
All right. Congratulations on your bestseller. It's good.
Well, thank you. I have to admit that one surprised the heck.
Cool.
It's about going gray and being authentic. So who would have thought?
Yeah, it's good. Leaning in.
Yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do. Like I said, it was just burning in me. I had to say it. So it seems to be striking a nerve. I hope you found this informative. I really, and I hope you have that Excel file so you can play around with the numbers. And oh my gosh, actually I forgot the most important thing. So let me bring this up, because it really is pretty cool. So
And Tamara, if you don't mind, is this Excel also shareable? The one that you showed for the participatory budget one?
oh yeah, I'm more than happy to share that. I mean, that's just a yeah, that's totally shareable. I apologize. Here's the TBM. So here, guys, is our final upshot. So here we've got our different strategies from, remember those 4 layers of how TBM did it? And we had our 15.5 million, and we can see ultimately, and I even drew on this to help you to kind of see how TBM does this from the standpoint of, oh, well, if you have this internal labor, you have rules, you have business decisions that are made of, well, that internal labor went for this support and it went for this IT management. And you shows that basically, again, that 15.6, it's 15.6 at every single layer of the taxonomy. But it helps you to actually say, you know what, as those costs are coming in the chart of accounts, in their cost centers, we absolutely, with the application, know that how we're going to have our business rules of how they roll up so that we can attribute it to the different service layers and the technologies and ultimately up to our business units. So this is how it came out in my little scenario here of that in our actual particular way that we're doing it, it's more like that we're spending 4 million for lemonade, almost 11.5 for our cookies. And remember, our plan was slightly different. But these decisions, as they come through, that when we look at our overall monthly cost, we look at, in this case, this is obviously a consumer retail-based organization. We can calculate, well, what were their number of units sold? What was our cost per unit of, what is our sale price? We can see our monthly revenue cost. And ultimately, here we look and see that, you know what? We're only making a profit of 40 cents per lemonade cup.
Yeah.
That may not be bad. I mean, at least we're making money, right?
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
certainly have our 5 stars, but as an organization, I'd sure like to know this, because I may say that, you know what, for 1 more star, I can, instead of investing in lemonade, I could easily win that star. I'm making almost $8 in profit per cookie box. As an entrepreneurial person, I would be seriously thinking and using this data to really understand my mixture. And the only way, again, that we should be seeing this holistically is if we pull it all together. And again, this is that fusion of having LPM and TBM together. So apologies that I left that till last moment. That was just me being sidetracked by myself. That was the last piece. And so you can, and I've literally tried to draw it out from you in when you do this, if you decide to use a tool like Aptio. And I make no commission. I have no reason to sell their stuff. I just really found it incredibly useful because I could see these numbers easily and close that loop. But this is what it does. It helps us to literally see from the standpoint of, this is what our finance sees, this is how we see it, and this is ultimately how it really and truly is holistically impacting whether or not we say we are making profit or not on those product, services, solutions that we offer.
Yeah, they're really focused on the operating leverage, huh? They're just going off expense, monthly cost. So if you
Yep.
look at cookies, you're right. Just yeah.
You would be making some
Yeah.
very possibly very different decisions. And we want our business people, because they need to know this and they want to know this. And I
Mhm.
believe this is going to be another way to help force that chasm closed. I am more than happy, and I will absolutely send out my little participatory budgeting with Hasbro stuff. You guys can play along with it. You just know that I would, this is me talking, this is Tam. I would want to augment that in real life with you, with making sure that we're taking that look from a OpEx, CapEx along with it and looking at our horizons. And that's oftentimes why LPM says you take it as information, but some analysis is going to go happen off screen. This is all the things happening off screen that should be being done.
Mhm.
Matt's saying, yeah, off screen. The magic. All right, guys, any questions for me?
No, just real quick on the on the bottom here, the layers. You move from the labor expense to 15 mil, right? And that's going into support and IT management. So in essence, what that is saying is that 3 million just overhead, but as far as building those applications, that labor rate from those developers, your architects,
Mhm.
12 million is allocated for that. The actual application, getting the software. Okay.
Mhm.
And the other
Yeah.
piece, that 3 million, that's just for overhead, strategy,
Yeah.
planning, meetings.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is so incredibly powerful because, Richard, when you have a system that's helping you to capture it at those industry best practice chart of accounts,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just at that burden rate. Again, there's so many informed decisions that you could be making.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, please let me know. Was this good? Did you like it?
Makes you want to read your book.
Oh, well, that's awesome too.
Con- Great context. Yep.
Guys, I actually have a hard stop at 7, and y'all can stay and talk to Tam as long as you want. I really appreciate y'all coming, but I have one question for you because we're testing out some of the different ideas that we have for webinars and stuff. And one of the ones that is really, really on my mind is this time good for a webinar? Or would you rather have it at a lunchtime? Like if we did it at, say, noon central on a Tuesday afternoon or something?
My personal preference is office hours, lunchtime on an office day, because evening is too crazy sometimes.
Evenings, right?
I
So,
think you will
so
get more participation if it is
it's lunch.
it's a lunch during a working day. That's
Okay.
my thought.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
Darnell says yes. Richard, lunch seems good for you.
Yeah, either or. I'm comfortable with either. I just, I'm driven by the content. So I prioritize based on the value. So either or, it just depends on what you're putting on, right? So I will not miss it if it's good stuff. I will make it a point to be there, irrespective of the time.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, I appreciate the feedback. And like I said, I appreciate all y'all being here. I'm sorry I have to drop so soon. I'm traveling this week. And my coworkers that are here, we've got to go get dinner. We have a 1-hour window to do it in. So I'm going to take advantage of that window so I don't have to starve.
Well,
Y'all have a
thank you,
wonderful rest
Matt.
of the night. Tam, thank
Thank
you so much. This was wonderful. And we hope to
Thank
see you guys in the future.